Yes, people, welcome back to the Copper Club podcast, sponsored by Player Stats. I'll be your host, Nathan Joyes, and I'm delighted for the first time in 2025, Peter Pankovski is back on the podcast. Peter, how we doing, my friend?
Yeah, I'm good. It's good to be back finally. This feels like an eternity now, doesn't it?
It has. It's been a while. Look, I can only apologize. Like from a personal point of view, I've been moving house. I'm recording this podcast from my old flat purely because I needed the Wi-Fi. So it's been a hectic period. And unlike the January transfer window, right? We normally do so many episodes, but it was really quiet from players moving across to Europe. I think last year was so busy, and then there's always going to be a little bit of a lull. But look, we've got plenty to talk about from South America on this episode. So stick with us for plenty of topics, plenty of rants. And I will say, well, a negative leading into a positive in terms of for the first time, we won't be doing the Libertadores magazine, but we will be doing a Club World Cup guide focusing on South American players. We're also in the middle of launching a newsletter called Copper Focus, where we will be interviewing South American players and staff. So a few more exclusives there. So we're trying to cover what we're doing away from the magazine onto socials. So do follow us across X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, TikTok and Instagram. We're trying to make more of a conscious effort. So a simple follow and a like across a few videos goes a hell of a long way. So that to one side. Let's crack on with the podcast. And the first player we want to talk about. Now, we're not a podcast to sort of use the word wonder kid quite a lot, but I think we can be excused for this one because we want to talk about Kendry Paez, who'll be, well, he has joined Chelsea and he will be linking up and being available for May when he turns 18. So a player to keep an eye on at the Club World Cup. But I think it's interesting to talk about his 2024 campaign with Independiente de Valle, which, do you know what? Chelsea fans obviously very interested to keep an eye on Kendry Paez as well as Esteval, but most people were more focused on the latter in the end because Paez's chances were quite limited under Javier Gandolfi, who has now been sacked and he's now moved to Atletico Nacional in Colombia. But for multiple reasons, Peter, Gandolfi didn't want to field him all that often across the entire 2024 campaign. Paez played 27 league games, where he scored 7 goals, 3 assists, made 6 appearances in the Libertadores, but Independiente de Valle were knocked out of the group stage, so incredibly disappointing. But off-field issues with Paez, which I'm sure people would have seen across socials, maybe people questioning his attitude, which are you concerned as a Chelsea fan with Paez, or do you think he just needs a clip round the ear and a Premier League club to come in and sort of keep him on the straight and narrow?
Yes and no, for sure. I am worried in a sense because whenever there's controversy, there's something in behind the scenes that you can always like, look with a bit of a side eye to. But on the flip side of it, I think people just forget in a sense that he's still 17 and he's been on the scene since 15, as in worldwide scene. He's been on the Ecuador scene even before that, a bit like Esteval. Now, credit to Esteval, yes, he stayed well away from like controversy, but we, I think on our end to criticize us as fans and as even as content creators in some sense, we tend to forget that these kids, at the end of the day, they're from South America. This is not disrespectful to South America, but it's a different environment. These tight-knit communities where kids of Kendry's type are like they see things in a much like different age to us. Like they see these, whether it's the clubbing incident where he was caught vaping in the club and stuff like that when he was only, I think he was still 16, or like maybe what was it? I think there was a rumor about him dating some Instagram model or something of sorts. Like I know I'm not I'm trying not to pass judgment in a sense, but these are things that at the end of the day you have to realize that this is a different environment there. And whilst I don't agree with it, not at all. I think when you're given the chance, and we're talking about a guy who's, as I said, from 15 onwards, he's been touted as the next, like the savior of the Ecuador generation in a sense, and the next big thing, if not the big thing coming from South America, or along with like the Endricks and Estivals. And so he's still a kid, and kids need time to mature. Like you said, I think the good thing now is that he's moved across to England. Like the season's over for pretty much Independiente del Valle, and there's nothing really for him to do in Ecuador. And I think dragging him away from that environment will undoubtedly help. I think that's kind of the key thing here to look at. Yes, okay, I know he didn't have the best of seasons, but let's be honest here. Like Gandolf, just to me, and I don't tend to say that I'm an expert in Ecuador, but there was something personal there. You can see it. It was in the way
Mm.
he was used. Like his role was often one time you'd see him more flank on the right wing type stuff to next playing in the central midfield. And I know it's not easy for a young player with all this expectation, with all just to consistently switch roles and so. I think the one thing, for example, Esteval has benefited from is being stuck in one position only and being given the freedom to make mistakes and being given to. And lastly, you also have to remember, I'm going on for ages about this, but um, you also need to remember that South Americans are very critical. Like, let's be honest here, that every single time a young player is great, he's the next coming of Pele, Maradona, or whatever, and then 5 games of bad form, and he's like the next big disappointment, or he's never going to make it. I think young players like Kendry tend to take time. Like, let's be honest, it's not a case of this isn't Football Manager. Like if a kid is destined to become good on Football Manager, he'll undoubtedly become good, regardless if he plays for Ludogorets
Hmm.
in Bulgaria
Hmm.
or if he goes to Chelsea. And this is not
People
a
people
one-way
forget
pool.
that, right? People
He,
forget that.
I know he had a down season. He did have a down season, but at the start of the season, he was still great. And then obviously this whole ordeal of like the issues with Gandolfi, the personal stuff that obviously I think is just a case of him outgrowing Ecuador in a sense, and maybe it's gotten to his head. It undoubtedly has for him to do so, but I do not believe that this is something you should take. Yes, you should take it into consideration, but the way people have blown it out of proportion to make it seem like it's like he's now on this very big downward spiral and he's the next, I don't know, say Lucas Piazon, for example, is the first player that
Mm.
comes to mind. I don't know why. Is very silly. Like we can't envisage this. If say, for example, he gets a great loan now to, for example, Strasbourg, because I'm associating it with Chelsea now, and he does the same way Andre Santos has been performing there, you'll see how people will turn a complete 360 and they'll start calling for Kendry to be loaned back immediately. Not to be loaned back, but to be recalled back to
Yeah,
start
yeah,
playing for
yeah.
Chelsea. It's just the way fans work. It's a close proximity from being like the worst player and the best player. It's just, it annoys me in a sense. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think there's going to be a theme on this particular podcast when we talk about certain players and a European audience, because Europeans only see select games, maybe a few international games before coming across, and then, like I said, judged very heavily. And we're not a shouty podcast, but we have made a noise about Paez. We've made noise around a few players that we're going to talk about in this particular episode. And if they don't perform, like you said, in those first few games or have a few bad games, it's like, well, you've judged them completely wrong. They're not clearly as good as you're making out to be and stuff like that. But Paez, it's just his situation we need to look into, which is obviously why we've started talking about those things which have appeared on social media, pictured in the nightclub, vaping, strip club in America, wasn't it, with Ecuador
Yeah,
on tour and stuff
yeah,
like
with
that? I think
Caicedo, I
when he was
think,
like
yeah.
16, he's 16, right? He's easily going to be led in these situations, and everyone says, well, it needs to be professional and stuff. Two ways of looking at it, right? And I think you've addressed that really well. I think the timing of his move across to Chelsea, yes, he's not going to be playing competitive football for 2 or 3 months when the season has just returned. So there's two ways of looking at that. It could be a good thing for him to embed him in before a potential loan, like learn the environment. I remember now, as I'm talking, when we did our Ecuador Copa America episode, on that particular episode, we were saying how desperate we were for him to leave Ecuador, and the Ecuadorian people wanted him out because they know that he can take his sort of career to the next step in Europe, and that will help the national team out massively. My cause for concern is two things. I could say John Kennedy, who we all raved about and had all the talent in the world to go and be a European star. Now, I'm not saying he's the next Lionel Messi or Ronaldo, but he chose to be more of a party animal, and that particular side of life, which has now heavily impacted what he's been able to achieve. But at the same time, maybe take and But my other sort of argument, without getting a little bit lost here in my head, because I think there's so much to talk about, is potentially, look, Independiente del Valle are known worldwide now for how they bring in youth players, give them a roof above their head, but also like teach them to become young, mature adults before moving them to Europe, because they know there needs to be steps off the pitch rather than just on it. So for me, that's a potential sort of red flag, red amber, which I'm trying to sort of
Yeah,
loosen it a little bit in terms of how if Independiente del Valle have gone, right, okay, we've had some issues with him, but maybe it's best for him to go to Chelsea and learn from now. Like that's something to potentially look at. But look, I
just
don't think. Go on.
just to interrupt you there. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No,
Literally, I
no.
think it was late last night that an interview came in actually from the president. I think it was. I'm not sure, but they said that actually Kendry specifically asked for this to move earlier, which
Okay.
was which is something I mention it only because like you mentioned it now, and I completely agree with what you said. I'm just saying that
Yeah.
if he himself was asked to do this, whether it's for settling in reasons or just getting away of this environment, it doesn't really matter. It's still a good thing that he knows that now is like it's in some ways make or break time. Like probably yes, he'll down the line he'll still be a good footballer, but if he wants to make it to the top tier of levels, this will probably aid him. So
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah, no, very interesting. I think there's multiple ways of looking at it. And you
yeah,
can also say because Gandolfi's been sacked and Independiente have brought in another new manager, is it best to try not to impress him for a couple of months when he knows he's not going to be used long term? That manager might go, well, look, Paez isn't part of my plan anyway, so I want to plan for life after him. Multiple ways of looking at it. So maybe it's the right thing to do. I just hope that
absolutely, yeah,
hopefully he's going to be around the right people and not get sucked into that London lifestyle, which he's probably looking at as he tips over 18. But I think we come from this and we spoke about this now for maybe 5 to 10 minutes, is because he is, and I think I've used the word before, and I hate to say it, but a generational talent is there. Like Ecuadorians are so excited about what this player can bring. Previous episodes, sorry, we've spoken about Piers and what he can do on the pitch. I just want him to get everything right off it in order to
yeah,
fulfill that talent. And yeah, do you know what? There's a lot of complaints about from people whether clubs should own, well, the multi-club ownership, but I think with Andros Santos, it's shown that there is a plan in place there that if he goes to Strasbourg, he's going to get played, and how well he's excelled there could be the same model for Kendry Paez. So yes, there are a lot of negatives to clubs being owned by the same sort of owner within that sort of multi-club ownership. Sorry, but I think Andre Santos has been the perfect example where Kendry Paez can potentially follow that, because a few players we're going to bring up in a minute have gone on loans to other clubs with promises and it's not been fulfilled. So if that is the right direction for him, so be it. As you said, on Football Manager, they've become an instant hit in 6 to 12 months. We need to remember like these are kids learning a new environment, and we bang that drum quite often, but people, especially a European audience, sometimes forget that. So let's give him a chance. If it is at Strasbourg, look at Valentin Barco, and I'm now talking about another player, someone who
yeah.
else is given an opportunity in the right environment. So really interesting to keep an eye on. Hopefully he embeds himself well over the next 2 or 3 months, and let's see what happens with him. Let's move on to some more youngsters, because it's just been the Under-20 South American Championships where Brazil reigned supreme. They came out on top somehow after losing the first game 6-1 to Argentina. They managed to top the group. They performed incredibly well, but their squad is insane. And as we have Peter on the podcast, I want to go through a couple of standout players, which Peter wants us to keep an eye on over the next 12, 18 months and beyond. And I think you're going to bring up a player who Jess brought up in the previous, or 2 episodes ago now, in a young Corinthians midfielder. So over to you, Peter.
Yeah, well, I think I wouldn't shock anybody if I said that actually Breno Bidon was my player from Brazil that I'm going to mention other players as well, and we've mentioned them previously in the pod actually, but I think Breno Bidon was one that we rightfully highlighted on the pod, and he with the Corinthians is just typical huge turnover. He's gotten the chances now. Moscardo left. He came in not to play in his position because they're different players, but he came in when pretty much Moscardo was leaving. So that was a chance for him to shine, and he's grabbed that chance with both hands because he's now one of the most top-rated youngsters in Brazil. Rightfully so, to be honest. I think he's been great, and just the playmaking ability that he shows, I think, is like really simplistic. He reminds me a bit of. I don't think it's a completely fair comparison. Sorry, but he reminds me a bit of Jorginho in a sense, just a little bit more mobile. Not a little bit even, but it's just the simplicity with which he plays and just strings up
Mm.
that connection between defense and midfield and forward, rightly so, and then just tying everything together, just getting on the ball, looking for space, then moving the ball forward. It's just whether it's by dribbling or just passing quickly, it's just so nice to see. And with him, like these days, because of the way kind of the players that we're going to mention later have panned out, I'm scared to throw out words, but I'm just so it's pleasant to see. And what I'm gonna say is I'm not gonna overhype him now because I'm scared everybody's gonna put my words out there. And nobody's gonna rate my opinion. But all jokes aside, I think he's a great youngster that plays well above his age. Like he's way more mature than he should be, and I think that's really it's admirable. It's very admirable actually.
Absolutely. And look, we said at the start of the podcast that the January transfer window was quiet. Maybe that was a good thing because Corinthians are building something here, but there's a huge and a high turnover with the club, which is why they've failed in recent years, but got the way back into the Libertadores. Brennan Bidon is going to stay. Yuri Alberto is going to stay. It's got Memphis Depay. We obviously know that Neymar's back in the league, so a lot more people, even if they're playing for Santos or not, they want to stay in Brazil because they're building a really exciting project. All eyes are on Saudi, but I think what the Brazilians are doing, yes, they're losing a few youngsters to Saudi because I just think that's inevitable with any league at the moment. But they're actually maintaining and keeping players where there's an actual
Yeah.
project, and Bidon is part of that. And I really liked, if you didn't listen to the episode where Jess spoke about Bidon as well, in Brazil he's known as the suit because he has so much class about him on the pitch. So I quite like the comparison with Jorginho there. I think he just does things simple, like you said, but he just oozes a bit of class as well. And I know you're
Yeah.
there saying, "Oh, I'm scared to say potentially his ceiling," but he had a wonderful tournament in the South American Championships, and I think another year under his belt in a Corinthian side, which will challenge for the top four, top five this season. I'm pretty sure of it. Will only sort of help him out really. So another full season behind him would be amazing. Hopefully he gets to have that and he's not picked up in the summer. Maybe the distraction of the Club World Cup will stop teams coming in making purchases. Who knows? Who knows? But do you want to highlight another Brazilian who caught your eye in this
Yeah.
tournament?
Yeah, the other two I'm going to mention is two names that probably went a little bit downhill since their respective departures to bigger clubs. One's obviously David Washington, who went to Chelsea and he's now back at Santos. And I think as much as I've hated on the move from a Chelsea perspective because I think it was just this chaos, like chaotic recruitment that Chelsea have done more so than the player himself. But I think he had a solid tournament. He wasn't exactly like a regular starter because, as you said, rightfully so, the squad is stacked. But I think every single time I laid eyes on the under 20 championship, it was one that he caught my eye. Even like I admit, one of the games I actually just watched the compilation of him, and he just seemed so nice and solid to see. And this kind of will lead to a discussion we're going to have, but it's nice to see a player that was touted for something bigger. I don't think he's the top level of talent that was coming out of even when he came out at Santos, but he's still a nice player, and I could envision like a good European career for him. And it was a nice reminder to see just how good he is. And that leads on to my next player, actually, which is Gabriel Moscardo, who we
Mm.
expected, especially in this PSG side that you can see now with a lot of young talent there. A lot of expectation was that he's next to Zion Emery and I forgot the Silva was it was from Benfica that moved. That he's really good. Like it was just an expectation that he's going to slot in there and they're going to create this midfield trio that will be there for ages potentially, and just it's not worked out that way. And then went on loan. I think it was to Reims, and he barely played. I've not even checked if it's an injury, to be honest. But he's just not left the same impression. And now people are questioning what's happened there, whether he was really ready. and again, we're going to lean into that discussion later on, but it's just seeing them perform at under 20 level so good in such a way, even if they lost to Argentina, yeah, I admit they did. It was that was horrid, but just seeing that, you're, as I said, you're just reminded how good these kids are. Like they're really, really good. Like really proper, like proper talented. And it's just a question about, as I mentioned, the environment. It's one where if the environment is carefully picked, they
Yeah.
could blossom. But with such clubs such as Chelsea, PSG, other clubs that like maybe Man City as well, I don't think you're required to essentially outperform a lot of players, and even then, you're not certain of it. So nobody will give you the environment to actually grow and make mistakes and do all this. And I'm just the good thing for me is seeing them in this championship. Honestly, with especially Moscato was just a okay.
100%.
He's still there.
Um,
Like that player that we watched the Corinthians is still there. It's just a question of yeah, okay, he got loaned to Reims and didn't play, but now, for example, if he has like something like Anthony, for example, a good loan that away from pressure, at the end of the day, you don't need to be at the top tier of levels to be like a good player. That doesn't make you like
mhm.
a pushover or anything. There's numerous other players that have been in the second tier of clubs and still been like, left an impression and left a mark in Europe. So
It's that's the right way to go, and I think that all stems down to football agents, and it's not just South America. We see it all across the world. But as you said there, this tournament just came at a nice time to. It probably came as a nice time to remind us that we weren't completely wrong, but also at the same time for these players to get a. Do you know what? Like I can push for a spot wherever I am, whether that is Chelsea or um, couldn't think of the name then. Chelsea, PSG, sorry, for example. But Moscardo played alongside Bidon, and they were both excellent throughout that tournament. David
yeah,
Washington, I don't think he was ever Chelsea level. I'm not sure what that deal was all about, but as you just pointed out, like there can be that stepping stone because if there is their potential going to Belgium, Portugal, etc., and then there's eyes on them, and then obviously the idea is to potentially beat the price tag. That's the aim of the game now because football has just got so ridiculous. But at the same time, you are ruining these young players. And hopefully, like this tournament has been a nice reminder for players like Moscardo. Next to Bidon, both of them performing next. Maybe Bidon can look at Moscardo or they've had a conversation for his situation. And maybe that's why, right, do you know what? I've got it good at Corinthians. Let me just stay there and I'm working my way up for the national team anyway. And Brazil, long term, not looking at the under 20s, but looking beyond at the senior team, are a nation which like to introduce talent playing in their domestic leagues, and that's what the fans want as well. And we have seen that over the last 12, 18 months,
yeah.
even though they've been a little bit of a car crash. It's been nice to still see that, so they don't have to go to Europe in order to get into that national team.
I
Now,
love just
before
how this leans into our next discussion. I love it. It just I feel
it's
like now I just want to go off about everything that's happened over the course of the last 2 months.
It's almost as if we've planned this, but before we get there, we just have one more player I want to talk about. And look, Manchester City haven't had, probably for the first time in 5, 6, 7 years, the first time they haven't had a good season, but they have a player to look forward to in Claudio Echeverri, who, yes, admittedly, didn't have an amazing season rather at River Plate last year. River Plate sort of struggled. I think it showed in the Copa Libertadores how far Argentinian football is away from the likes of Brazil at the moment, and there's a gap which needs bridging there. Clearly, there needs to be investment. But Claudio Echeverri didn't have a solid season for River Plate, but similar to Moscardo, he's gone into this tournament 6 goals, 3 assists. He was the main man for Argentina. He dominated this tournament as he dominated the Under 17 World Cup previously. And it was just a nice reminder to see when players like this go into this sort of level where they're playing in their own age category or in and around players who are 2, 3 years of their age group and perform at this level, you have to take note. And this is where the message can be lost when they eventually move to Europe and they don't settle particularly well in that first 6, 12 month period. But players who outperform their age group at international level in a tournament like this, in a South American tournament, have to be looked at. And we could talk about numerous players here, but Claudio Echeverri moving across to Man City. Do you know what? Maybe when he first signed, I was like, that's classic Man City with the relationship they're wanting to build in South America, but where is he going to fit? But they're in a huge transition period, and Claudio Echeverri could move into this and play a key part. And I think that under Pep Guardiola is looking an even better fit. I was a bit worried at first because I was invited on to BBC Manchester, and the first question I got asked was, "Is this the new Lionel Messi?" And if that's the expectations from a European audience, yes, they haven't seen these players, but it's ridiculous, isn't it? So
Yeah.
these tournaments which have come in, and for him to show to, I think, look more Man City, similar to Paez and Esteval with Chelsea. Man City fans have been taking a closer look at Echeverri, and I don't think there was too much to shout about during River Plate over that last 12 months. I think he sort of tarnished his relationship with the fans by going to City and what he was saying. He wasn't PR trained, obviously. They didn't have an amazing campaign when it came to the Libertadores, but all in all, like, he's gone to the South American Championship and he's bossed it and he's been brilliant. And if we get to see a glimpse of that in the Premier League under Pep, I don't think there's a better sort of fit for him at Man City long term, and especially because they're in this transitional period. So really exciting for Man City. I know they've just been knocked out to Real Madrid in the most embarrassing way, but that is a positive to look at the situation. So hopefully we've timed this podcast at the right time for Man City fans. Now, there's a whole heap of players we could keep talking about, but we have a nice article going onto the website this week around 7 to 8 players from the tournament. So keep an eye out for that. We'll post it across socials. But for now, that's the end of part 1. We'll see you for part 2 for more debates. Football fans and stat lovers, listen up. If you're serious about understanding the game and digging deeper into the numbers, you've got to check out Player Stats. It's the ultimate platform for both football stats and player data. With Player Stats, you can see every stat at a glance, so there's no more clicking or digging around. Whether you're tracking player performances, team stats, or just want to explore detailed player props, Player Stats makes it simple, fast, and comprehensive. And here's the best part. As a listener of this podcast, you can get 20% off your first month when you sign up with the code COPPER. That's right, full access to all leagues, players, and stats, now at an exclusive discount. Head over to playerstats.football, use the code COPPER, and start exploring today. Welcome back to part 2, where we're going to continue our rambling around South American players. And we're going to do something slightly different this time. Instead of looking at those actually in South America, there's a couple of players who have continuously been in the news at the moment. One or two, or even both, have been branded as failures, and Peter and I are going to get into this now. We're, of course, talking about Real Madrid's Endrick and Real Betis's Vitor Roque. I don't know why that name just forgot me there for a second. Endrick and Vitor Roque, where Endrick... Do you know what? There's so much we can talk about here, and I think because of... Let's just get straight into Endrick to begin with and see where this conversation leads us, because I think there's so much I want to say. But with Endrick going to Real Madrid, obviously they're another club who didn't want to miss out on potentially the next quote-unquote Neymar. I think that was their plan with this when they originally signed him. And for, 40, 50 million at the time, they didn't want to miss out
60,
on...
actually.
It was, even more
No,
ridiculous.
never mind. Yeah, but still ridiculous
A
price.
lot
Yeah.
of money for the time when he
Yeah,
performed out that Copinha, 16, 17. It was a good year and a half before he could even move across. And obviously, Endrick would never have envisioned he was signing at the same time as Kylian Mbappe. Like, that was probably never part of his plan. But was he ever going to walk into Real Madrid's starting 11 from the beginning and perform? The answer is no, because he was always going to get a few minutes here and there. He scored 1 league goal in 14 games, but if you look, he's barely played more than 10 minutes in a row. In Copa del Rey, he scored 3 and 3, which I think shows more true to his character, because guess what? He's actually played a few minutes. And then he scored 1 goal in the Champions League in 6 appearances. Again, a handful of minutes. So when you actually break the stats down, how is an 18-year-old who, by the way, there's very few players who I've seen carry a team like Palmeiras to the title. Like, that 12-month period, or even probably the last 4 months when Abel Ferreira finally decided to start playing from the beginning, he almost saved Ferreira's job, in my opinion. He took them to the Brazilian title. He was unbelievable in Brazil. Now, you're going to have listeners on this podcast going, well, if he was so good in Brazil, like, that's a completely different level to Real Madrid. And I agree with those listeners.
because it's Real Madrid.
But the move is a huge jump. And I can
Yeah.
see why maybe his agent or family have gone Real Madrid, money, tick. He's going to be a superstar. And I stand by it. Endrick will be a superstar if he gets it right. But I think because there's been so much noise with Endrick around social media, his girlfriends, his comments, and what he's like off the pitch, not quite Kanye West, is he? But he comes up with quite a few sayings which go viral, and then people talk about him going, well, he can't even get into Real Madrid side anyway. I don't think that particularly helps him out. But it's his character which sort of led him to Real Madrid anyway, and as to why he was so good for Palmeiras on the pitch. You need to have a bit of arrogance. I mean, are we dismissing Cristiano Ronaldo for his arrogance and what led him to his success? So for me, bad move to Real Madrid, needs a loan. Carlo Ancelotti, I don't know if it's the Spanish media or even the UK media which are trying to make out there's this rift between the two at the moment. I'm not 100% sure, but he's someone who needs to continue developing because he is above his age category 100%. Endrick for me is far better than Vitor Roque. We'll get on to Vitor Roque soon. I still love him. I still think he's great, but Endrick's ceiling is incredibly high if he moves into the right environment. Peter, do you agree or do you disagree?
It's a similar discussion to one like Kendry in a sense, as in like yes and I wouldn't even say no. It's a little bit of a no, but not just to like get into a heated debate here. I'm only saying that like to me, and we'll obviously get onto Roque as well, but I just think these guys move way too early. Like it does seem like the current crop of Brazilian players in general just move a little bit too early. Even like I'm glad in the sense that Andre Santos has actually had this move, for example, at Strasbourg, to just not be in this toxic Chelsea side right now that expectations are very
Well, it's
heavy.
away from the limelight, isn't it? You're out of the
Exactly,
spotlight.
exactly. But you're very correct in saying that. That just to like now contradict myself in the sense, like what you said is entirely right. Like on this is a youngster who again he's 17 years of age to 18. He just moved from Palmeiras, which like this is Palmeiras we're talking about, like champions of Brazil and so. It's like not now, but the year he moved.
Yeah.
And he's just gone on from being arguably one of their best players to going in at Real Madrid. This isn't Barnet we're talking about or some other team that he's not going to have any pressure on him. No disrespect to Barnet, I'm sorry,
I
but
would
like
love to see Endrick at Barnet. He'd score about 50 goals.
like we're speaking about Real Madrid. Like this is Real Madrid, the
Yeah.
best club in the world, the most the club with the most European titles, like Champions League, the club with the biggest pedigree in the world, the one where like the pinnacle of every player's career is Real Madrid or Barcelona. Like this is when they come knocking, there's no player that will tell them no, unless he's like the old school Italian players like
Mm.
Del Piero, Totti, and so on that have rejected these moves out of love for the clubs. But this is one-offs. Like this is, and you can't tell me that we're looking at a kid who's come in and has competition from Vinicius Junior. Like yes, okay, he doesn't play on the wings, but just saying, like he has competition from Vinicius Junior, Rodrigo, Kylian Mbappe, all players who will likely play ahead of him if there's a crunch game because he's not ready as a false nine or whatever, it doesn't matter. Like the tactical plan will be there for that player to play up top rather than. I'm sorry, but Jude Bellingham was playing striker last year, pretty
Mm.
much. Like yes, his role wasn't as a striker, but that was like the
Yeah,
whole
yeah.
plan. Like we're talking about this, and suddenly you throw in a scrawny kid who is, as you rightfully pointed out, very very talented, but he's gonna have to come in and for like the limited amount of minutes, especially like his coach is Italian as well. The biggest pragmatists in the world are Italian coaches. Like, if they can win the game, they don't care about how they're going to win the game. So we're talking about a guy who gets limited sample size minutes here, and he has to be absolutely unreal. That's not just going to happen easily, especially when you had the burnabout, like with the expectations over your shoulders. We saw Vinicius for 2 years being branded as one of the worst players ever to be gotten from Brazil. And everybody, I can tell you for a fact that everybody was hating on Vinicius so much. I was saying like, look, I know, like this is a great player. He was a Flamengo. He's won the Libertadores. He was very good. Like there was one person more that agreed with me, and he's a Flamengo fan, and he on Twitter that is.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like, look, I understand it. In some sense, yes, he's been underwhelming, but this is that you have to look at the bigger picture here. We can't just look at it and say, oh, great, he's terrible now. And this is why I hate, and I'm going to lean into this actually, this is why I hate the Vitor Roque move to Barcelona, because Barcelona are on the flip side of it. The good thing in Real Madrid is because they have this core of great players, regardless of like Barcelona right now beating them on a consistent basis. It's like they have this core of amazing players that when you slide into that, there's room for you to make mistakes, and you can take your time to transition into something, and they're gonna give you the time, whether it's through loans. Like yes, for example, we saw it with Martin Odegaard, who okay, he didn't pan out the same way at Real Madrid level, but he moved to Arsenal, and he's now one of the best players,
Hmm.
and one of the best players in the Premier League.
Well, yeah, look, before we get onto Vitor Roque, let's just address this with Endrick, right? Palmeiras are screaming for a number nine now, and obviously they're looking at Vitor Roque, which, I mean, we're sort of going back to him there. That links up. But Palmeiras have been desperate for a number nine. It ruined the season last year, and it could potentially ruin this season as well. Imagine if Endrick just stayed for another 12 months behind him, by the way. Would it have left Brazil with another, what, 20, 30, maybe more goals to his name across all competitions? Paulinho did it at Mineiro, so why couldn't Endrick in one arguably the best or one of the best teams in Brazil and then move across? As you were talking, I know players from South America can't leave before they're 18, but it seems pointless that people can get them on a pre-contract before then anyway. It sort of like ruins that anyway. For me, and I know people may not agree with me on what I'm saying here, but players who move across too early or get these pre-contracts too early, and then obviously now they're getting berated in a completely new environment, new country, etc., etc. Why not up that cap to 19 or even 20? I think that would be so ideal and beneficial to everybody. I know everyone's trying to grab the next best player, the next best wonder kid. But if Endrick wasn't allowed to leave till 19, 20, do you know what? I think that would even help players like Esteban as well. Like him playing along with Endrick, it'd be brilliant to see. The clubs deserve it because they've had the players in the academy from the age of like 10, 11, 12, or even younger. Like the confidence and the players would have then and the maturity that they would probably get between the ages of 17 to 20 is huge. And I think that would then take the pressure off them having to deliver. 18-year-olds, I know Hendrick's a confident boy, but walking out into the Bernabeu and you're given 10 minutes and you've got to perform your best self within that time, come on, like it's so ridiculous. People don't put themselves in situations, and I know I normally don't get this irate on the podcast, but as we're
I
talking
mean,
about it, the comments I've had is just been insane.
it's a double-edged sword, really, though. I mean, I agree with you in a sense, but they'll also disagree with you because if this also leans into a bit of like you outgrow the league.
Mm.
Like, for example, Neymar outgrew, and I know this is obviously Neymar we're talking
But you're
about.
talking about the top 1% there, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, 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 for certain, but like in a sense, sometimes they outgrow the teams that they're playing for. Like, for example, if this happens and say Andre was 18 at the time, and then he moved when he was 19, I think it was from Vasco, like but if he was just 1 year younger, for example, in Andre's case, he outgrew Vasco in the first half of the season in Serie A.
Mm.
Like you could just tell that that team was too small for him nowadays. And this is no disrespect to Vasco. It was just the level of the team wasn't that good. So this is why I'm saying that the environment is the key thing to me, at least. It's not a case of when the player moves; it's just where he moves and what the environment is. To me, you said it right. He probably didn't expect Mbappe to end up there, although like little rumors were there since forever. But I don't know. But
Mm.
there's so many players that don't tend to look into the environment they're joining in. Like, yes, I'm not saying like how they're going to be treated on an internal level because I'll never know that and how they're like being who likes them, who doesn't, who's so and so. But just the players that are available there, like the one best thing about, say, for example, and I know again this is Cristiano Ronaldo or Neymar we're talking about, but the one good thing about these types of players is they join big clubs, but they join them pretty much with a ready-made spot for them as long as they're good enough. Like we knew that the competition they faced is decent, but decent at internal level. So
Mm.
the moment Neymar hit the ground running, he was the starting left wing at Barca. The moment Cristiano Ronaldo hit the ground running, he was the starting right wing at Barca. And yeah, this also includes attitude, approach to training, etc., etc. And I know this is also like the 1% of top tier talents, but also we placed Endrick there anyways. So if if you're that top tier level of talent that you're aiming to reach, you shouldn't be. if you say, for example, have against you, say we're talking about Barcelona hypothetically, and this is a Estival joining Barcelona, and he joining Barcelona has to beat Ferran Torres, for example. If you're good enough, Ferran Torres is an average footballer. Like you're going to beat him, but you're in a position to know that you're going to beat him. But this isn't. If you're joining now, you have Rafinha to beat. You have, say, for example, someone else to beat. Like maybe Lionel Messi is also there, so you know you're not starting on the other wing. And
But
this
let's talk
leans into
about,
the idea about environment. That's what I'm trying to point
yeah,
out.
100%. And look, let's talk about Vitor Roque now then. Okay. He left Atletico Paranaense. So we're talking about Endrick leaving Palmeiras, top club. Atletico Paranaense almost got relegated last season. So there was a huge decline. I know Fernandinho is there, but there's a huge gap if you're going to break it down for European audience. Atletico Paranaense are Europa Conference League, and that's where they sit at the moment. Okay, yes, they were competing in the Libertadores with Vitor Roque, but they've been on a decline for a while. There's a sizable
Yeah,
gap between the top two or three in Brazil, and Paranaense aren't part of that. Now, Vitor Roque was performing incredibly well for them. I can't remember how many goals he's got on the top of my head, but 10, 15 goals plus.
above
But
20 for certain.
and then 100%, right? Okay, and then he had that injury, that back injury, wasn't it? Or which was like 6 weeks, 8 weeks before he joined Barcelona, so he had that to deal with as well. And then he's gone across early than expected. I know there's that whole debate whether Xavi didn't want him, Deco wanted to bring him in early because they wanted competition and to ease him in with Lewandowski. And I saw it as a really positive thing. Oh, you can learn under him. But having listened to what you've just said there, well, look, Lewandowski, even at the age of 34, 35, he's doing it, but he's expected to score every single game. So when he's substituted, when it's not going right for Barcelona and Vitor Roque comes in, it's his job in 10, 15 minutes to score in that period, which Lewandowski failed to over 70, 75 minutes. And then he's deemed not good enough. So then he goes on loan to Betis. And even at Betis, right, he scored 4 in 21 games, 3 in 4 in the Copa del Rey. So averaging, what, 1 in 4.5 in the league, which is okay as you're settling as a young striker when it hasn't gone well for you at Barcelona. But 4 in 3 in the Copa del Rey, yes, he played easier opponents, but just goes to show when he's leading the line and given an opportunity, guess what? He can score. So I still firmly believe Vitor Roque can have a successful career in Europe. He's not on the same level as Endrick, but he's a top player. And I just, like you said there needs to be a ready-made spot and a plan for him, and that needs to be aligned from the scouting, from the directors, all the way to the manager and who brings him in. There needs to be a correlation of agreement. If only two of those three agree, you shouldn't be bringing that player in because he's a young person here, a young boy, and you're ruining his career by bringing him in. And like he scored, I think it was like 1 in 10 in Barcelona if you looked at it, but he's barely played any minutes within those
Yeah,
games, and the expectations and the weight of pressure on him. I don't think even Endrick's had that pressure on him at Real Madrid
yeah.
because, as you said, there's players delivering there.
Yeah, but the thing with Vitor Roque is the only thing I want to say in his defense, in a sense, is I think the massive issue with him is Vitor Roque was one that you could tell he needed time, in a sense, where even like in when he started off at Cruzeiro, when I was watching him in Serie B, and then when he moved to Paranaense, he had time periods of adaptation to the level that he was facing. So he didn't start off well when they played in the Sudamericana, and then he played well. Like these are all growing periods. Like you can tell there's an upwards trajectory with him. So he needs the time to make these mistakes and so on and so on. And as you rightfully pointed out, he wasn't given that at Barcelona. And I think whether it's due to internal controversy about this transfer, whatever, whatever. Again, one thing we'll never know, but I don't think the one thing I've always disliked about Barcelona, and I'm so actually happy that his agent mentioned it, that he wasn't treated well, and obviously that's why he kind of leaned Estival away from moving to Barcelona because Estival's dream move was Barcelona, is exactly that, that there was no clearancy like in the way that the Vitor Roque's development was going to go. Yes, I think he's actually I can use the word actually. I think he's flopped, but at the same time, it was one where I just don't think it was ever handled correctly from both sides
Hmm.
at all, to be honest. And
You know what though?
how
What's
how
really
it
funny
goes,
is, go on.
yeah, I was just gonna say that how it goes for Vitor Roque here is now down to him, and I'm actually happy that he might actually rejoin back with Palmeiras because I think it will be a nice restart. But I just think he should have been given a little bit more time to solidify himself and maybe, as I said, make these mistakes, make these everything, like take the time to settle in. And I just think the whole issue at Barcelona probably affected him so much that it
Of course.
reflected also on his Betis move. And I'm not surprised he didn't perform. And I'm kind of happy that he's quickly kind of understood it and would prefer to come back to Brazil, even if he does have like a case of Gabigol type of resurgence. Although Gabigol obviously moved at a later date and
Mm.
age, and Vitor Roque is still 20 or in his early 20s. He's he could still say, for example, play 2 years for Palmeiras, be very good, and then come back to Europe with a slightly lower level team, and then
Yeah.
rebuild. Like we've seen players peak at 27 years of age. That this football is not just a normal trajectory. I'm sorry, it pisses me off to no degree. Like players can come back and revive their careers. It's not hard. I'm sorry, Jamie Vardy was 27 playing non-league football, whatnot.
Can I just say also, Chris Wood,
For
33,
example, yeah,
33,
exactly.
34, having the best season he's ever had. Like it's if you don't peak at 17, 18, guess what? That's okay. And I think what's really important to mention there, so yes, I've already said that Palmeiras need a striker, so it seems like a good fit. Have that reset button. It's obviously taken a knock with his confidence, okay? But also, I think this is a great way to leave the podcast because we could talk about this all day. But Felipe Scolari, when they played him in the Libertadores final at the age of 17, said like he'd never trusted a striker for that sort of role in that sort of environment and that sort of final before. And Scolari came out and said he was just like, Vitor Roque is going to be one of the best strikers or one of the best strikers I've seen at this particular age. Now, are you telling me that Scolari got that completely wrong? I probably would lean towards Scolari being particularly right with that. But look, let's park that there. It can be really interesting to see. I'd love to see Vitor Roque back in Brazil. I think it'd do him the world of good. Endrick, he needs that low move, so one to keep an eye on as well. We'll follow them, of course, on the podcast. So we'll wrap up this week's episode there. Once again, a huge apologies for only one this month. Going forward, we will have at least two. We will be building more content around the Club World Cup and focusing on the South American teams heading into that. So do follow us across all social channels and look out for the Club World Cup guide, which will be out in May. So a few months away yet, but we started building it. Very excited. And of course, Copper Focus, the new newsletter. We have a very, very exciting player who we're going to be interviewing for that. All will be revealed soon. But until then, take care, people, and we will see you next time.